Okay, this lecture is part of a series of lessons on U.S. wars that the United States have started or have manipulated the Congress and U.S. public into joining an ongoing war. All right, like World War II, for example. Right. All right, this is the first a war I'll cover. Uh, and it involves the Iraq invasion war, uh, fairly long war. And so I will show you how the Bush administration manipulated the U.S. Congress and the U.S. public into, wanting this war. All right. What I'll do is I'll show you a day by day account of things that were done to manipulate, America into this war. All right, these are the things day by day, and then I'll do a review, give you an overall idea of what was done, and I'll briefly show you this. I'm not going to explain this, but this is a diagram that depicts the many ways war in the in a Middle East oil producing country is very profitable across many aspects, not just oil, right? Oil, you can say, is even just a small part of it. All right, and I'm not going to cover this, but this is an analysis of the methods of manipulation, used by the Bush administration. I think that's going to take too long, so I'll just focus on this. Try to keep it short and simple. So to begin with, before I get to a day by day, account of what happened, what was done, I'll give you an overview. This stretches a little over a year. Here is the 9/11 attacks by Al Qaeda, and here is the November election. Here's a date that Congress voted for the war resolution. All right. So let's go through this, and I'll first of all explain the terms here. P stands for planning to use the attack by Al Qaeda. Remember, Al Qaeda did this, not Iraq, and using Al Qaeda's attack to attack Iraq. All right. F stands for jacking up fear, creating a massive wave of fear mongering day by day, you know, just pumping up the American public with fear of something far worse than this. All right. That's what they're trying to do. R stands for the push to get a congressional resolution. All right. Okay, so let's take a look at this. I'll just go through it real quickly, as quick as possible. On day one, this is 9/11, right? You had three planes, trying to hit U.S. targets, Twin Towers, Pentagon, probably our nation's capital, right? On that day, Department of Defense, Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz are both trying to twist this attack by Al Qaeda to attack Iraq. That's according to Richard Clarke here. I'll talk about him, right? And then another Clarke, spelt differently, General Wesley Clark, went to the Pentagon and spoke to a person. He recounts how he found out that we're going to attack Iraq for no reason, right? Iraq hasn't been connected to 9/11. And then he finds out we're going to go further. We're going to overthrow the governments of 7 nations in 5 years. Right? And he was kind of shocked about that. We'll talk about that. And so the key elements of the plan are, you have to time this. You time it with the 1 year anniversary of 9/11. You time it with the vote for the resolution. You time it with the November election. Okay. Now, why you time it is because with the anniversary of 9/11 and with all the programs recounting the attacks, right, the fear is reactivated, right? All the horror and terror and gut wrenching, fear on that day is reactivated, brought back to mind, and then you take all that fear and you dump it on Iraq. Now, Iraq didn't commit this attack; it was Al Qaeda, right? So well, here, in fact, the Bush administration, an anonymous official, and you know if this is reported in the papers, it's a key official, bragged to the press about the plan, but he kept it anonymous. So here on September 7th, just before the 1 year anniversary, right about here, a Bush administration official said, "We are using a, quote, meticulously planned strategy to persuade the public, the Congress, and the allies of the need to confront the threat of Saddam Hussein. In the end, it will be difficult for someone to vote against him." And he was talking about the Iraq War resolution, which they voted here. So they got a strategy to make it like impossible to vote against him. All right, to twist arms. All right. So one thing they did is they don't want to do that. They planned this blitz of fear campaign, time with the 1 year anniversary, right? So people already have their fear jacked up because they remember, the 1 year anniversary, and it's all reactivated with all the programs and all the commemoration of the attack, and then you jack up fear of even worse, that Saddam Hussein is planning to use weapons of mass destruction to attack us or to give to terrorists. All right. So this is pumped up day by day with massive fear mongering. All right. Then the Bush administration pushed hard, congressional leaders hard, to get the vote for the resolution right here, right before the congressional recess, where all the congressmen leave Washington, go back to their home constituency, and desperately campaign the last 3 weeks before the election. Right? This is the leverage. This is arm twisting. All right? And now, the resolution itself, authorized the president to use military force, but it's a euphemism. It's been used before. These resolutions are the legal basis for war. Once the Bush administration has it signed by Congress, it is their hot little ticket to war. They have a pass to war. 3 times this has been done, right, in our history: Spanish-American War, Vietnam War, and this war. Right? Now, I say euphemistic because it is deceptively, benign. It seems harmless, right? But it is no less than a declaration of war. You can do everything in a war that a declaration of war does. Fight a 15-year full-on war. Now, a declaration of war only gives a handful of additional powers to the president, which are, in large part, are just minor. Power in foreign trade, transportation. You can expropriate transportation. Do things with communication, manufacturing. For example, coronavirus, you're doing this, right? The president has the power to, basically force companies to build whatever, respirators or whatever. And something with alien enemies. I think that has to do with due process. Okay. So the idea is you create a huge barrage of fear. Fear, 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 fear. Now, within this fear, it's like a toxic brew of fear, right? You then introduce the resolution now and say that this is the thing that's going to keep Americans safe, right? We need this resolution to keep Americans safe. And then you put the vote for this resolution right before the congressional recess. Now, given that the election is right here, within this toxic atmosphere of fear, if anyone votes against this resolution, their opponent, can eat them alive, right? So if you vote against this, you're committing political suicide, all right, with the November election here. So that's the leverage. Get people to vote for this. And we'll see in reality if this worked that way. We'll see what the paper said reporting on this. All right, so let's go through it day by day. Okay, 9/11, 2001, everyone knows that a bunch of terrorists hijacked 3 planes Uh, no, more than 3 planes. 4 planes, I guess. They wanted 4 planes, yeah. Um, Two hit the Twin Towers, one hit the Pentagon, and one was going to hit the, somewhere in Washington, probably the Capitol. Uh, I say, why target these? Well, these are symbols. Symbols of economic power, symbols of military power, symbols of political power, right? All right. Now, on that very same day, according to the testimony of Richard Clarke in his book Against All Enemies, now Richard Clarke, I'll give you a little background on him. So Richard Clarke, at this time, was the U.S. anti-terrorism czar, the top U.S. anti-terrorism expert, coordinating the anti-terror efforts of all U.S. intelligence agencies, CIA, FBI, NSA, DIA, right? Right. He was the anti-terror czar in both the Clinton administration and in the G.W. Bush administration, until he resigned when we invaded Iraq. All right. Now, he said that Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz, from the get-go, from day one, were pushing to pin the 9/11 attack on Iraq, when he knew that this was Al-Qaeda. All the intelligence said this is Al-Qaeda. So this is what he says. This is a direct quote from his book. Quote, "Then I realized with almost a sharp physical pain that Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz were going to try to take advantage of this national tragedy to promote their agenda about Iraq." All right. Then the very next day, he says Bush is pushing this on him. Bush asked Clarke if there was a connection between Iraq and Al-Qaeda. Clarke said no. Bush told him to look again. So Bush is pushing it. Clarke said, quote, "Absolutely we will look again. I was trying to be more respectful, more responsive. But we have looked several times for state sponsorship of Al-Qaeda and not found any real linkages to Iraq. Iran plays a little, as does Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, Yemen. Look into Iraq. Saddam," the president said testily, and left us. Lisa Gordon Haggerty stared after him with her mouth hanging open. All right, so there's a push to pin this on Iraq. Attacked by Al-Qaeda. So this is what Clarke says in his book. Quote, "Having been attacked by Al-Qaeda, for us to now go bombing Iraq in response would be like our invading Mexico after the Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor." All right? All right, so think about it. Let's say you're an American, way back in 1941, right? December 7th, I suppose maybe December 8th, you look at the papers, and you're shocked. You see full-blown, front page picture of American ships bursting into flames, right? Burning, a lot of smoke, right? And it says Japs bombed Pearl Harbor, right? And you're like, oh, damn, Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. What should we do? I don't know. Oh, I get it. Let's go invade Mexico. That'll do it. That'll show them. So that's what Clarke is saying. That's how crazy it was. But Americans bought it. All right. So that's day one. Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz pushing it. Day two, Bush pushing it. Let's go attack Iraq because of this Al-Qaeda attack. All right. Now, this is a testimony of General Wesley Clark. This guy right here. 4-star general, as high as you get during peacetime in the U.S. military. And he was supreme commander of NATO for a number of years. All right. Now, 10 days after the attack, he said, well, he just had to visit the Pentagon to see what was going on, right? So he runs across an officer after seeing, like, he saw Wolfowitz, he saw Cheney, I don't know if he saw Rumsfeld, I can't remember. Anyways, he saw a number of guys, but then he ran across a general who was on the Joint Staff, who was formerly an officer on his staff. So a guy who was a subordinate to General Wesley Clark. The general says, "Hey, I want you to know we're going to attack Iraq." Clark is, "Well, why?" General, "We don't know." Did they tie Saddam to 9/11? No. Right? So I'll show you this video. So 6 weeks later, Clark goes back to the Pentagon and sees the same general. Right? He goes, "Hey, we still going to attack Iraq?" General, "Oh, sir, it's worse than that." He pulls out a piece of paper. "I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense office. We're going to attack and destroy the governments of 7 countries in 5 years. Iraq, Libya, Syria, Sudan, Somalia, Lebanon, Iran." Well, that'll bring a lot of stability to the Middle East. Um, so this is what General Clark had to say about it. I'll show you the video of it.
Is thinking.
What happened in 9/11 is we didn't have a strategy, we didn't have bipartisan agreement, we didn't have American understanding of it.
He says it's a policy coup that got us in there.
Policy coup.
Let me jump ahead to
A coup. What do you think about that? I said, well, sir, thanks for reading my book, and he said, thanks. That's all the time I've got. Really? And I went downstairs. I was leaving the Pentagon, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office and said, I want you to know, he said, sir, we're going to attack Iraq. And I said, why? He said, we don't know. He said, I said, well, did they tie Saddam to 9/11? He said, no. He said, but I guess they don't know what to do about terrorism, and so they think in March of '91, which we had provoked, and then we kept our troops on the sidelines and didn't intervene. He said,
all right, so this is a statement by Wolfowitz. He's talking to Wolfowitz now, and he's recounting what he's. This has to do with the 7 countries in 5 years.
but one thing we did learn, he said, we learned that we can use our military in the region, in the Middle East, and the Soviets won't stop us. He said, and we've got about 5 or 10 years to clean up those old Soviet client regimes. Syria, Iran, Iraq, before the next great superpower comes on to challenge us. And it was like, I'm coming out of the Mojave Desert. I've been training troops. I haven't been thinking geostrategy for some time. And suddenly a guy just sort of shoves this nugget at you. Well, you remember it. It was a pretty stunning thing. I mean, the purpose of the military is to start wars and change governments. It's not to sort of deter conflict. We're going to invade countries, and my mind was spinning. And I put that aside. It was like a nugget that you hold on to. This country was taken over by a group of people with a policy coup.
All right, that's what he says. I mean, this is he's saying that this is stunning. This is U.S. history. We have overthrown many governments. Right? This is nothing new. This is something we've been doing quite a bit of. So, he's a general. He's not familiar with U.S. history here. But yeah, it is stunning that we're gonna overthrow 7 countries' governments in 5 years. That's a plan. All right. This has clear implications for our relations with Russia and conflict creation. I'm not going to get into this now. That's a whole nother another topic. All right. So here is 2002 now. Right. This is when the attacks happened. Right. So we're now dealing in about the 1 year later time frame. Right. And this is when they had the big timed campaign to boost up fear and to get that resolution passed, right? So they had their hot little ticket to war. So these are just general statements on the methods. One is a timed bait and switch fear campaign, right? Timed with the 1 year anniversary of 9/11, timed with right before the November election. You have a ticking time bomb, right? So throughout, you'll see that they're using time is short. Time is not on our side. Time is running out. Before long, it's going to be too late. It'll be too late for us to do anything. We have to act now, right? It's almost like those commercials that try to get you to buy things. You have like, 10 minutes left. It's called the ticking time bomb method. Time release of false manufactured intelligence reports. There were, well, how many were there? I think there were 6. We'll cover how many false ones there were. Time arrest of terror cells. There were 8 arrests or legal actions. Now a lot of people may say, "Oh, that's crazy. That's conspiracy theory. They can't do that." Right? All right. We'll take a look. We'll take a look, and you see the pattern, right? And we'll discuss also how easy it would be with one agency controlling all that. That's all FBI. A barrage of fear speeches by Bush. I think he had 9, either speeches or statements. Fear-generating sound bites. Right? Time is running out. Time is short. We don't need a mushroom cloud for a smoking gun. That was one of the big, sound bites they would pass, right? Sound bites are good because they stick in people's minds. They're like jingles for an advertising, right? And they have impact, right? Short and simple, emotional. All right, so here's the start of the sequence of the big blitz to manufacture and build up fear. All right, 8/26, Dick Cheney, ex-CEO of Halliburton, said Saddam Hussein would fairly soon have nuclear weapons. All right, he's going to have them soon. Right? Iraq had no nuclear weapons program. And then Cheney vehement on necessity of military action against Iraq. He said, we got to take military action. Right? This is fear-mongering. Fear-mongering works because fear is powerful. Fear is primal. Fear can overcome reason. Right? Fear is about survival. 8/28. Terrorist cell from Detroit arrested and charged. Right? So, this is a year after 9/11. There's still terrorists living among us. Right? That creates fear. They can attack us again. Think of all that terror for that day. They can happen again. Maybe worse. Right? Fear-mongering. Same day, across the country, terrorist cell arrested in Seattle. Terrorists living around us, all among us. Right? On September 3rd, New York Times reported that there has been the first wave of documentaries reliving 9/11. Right? They've started, and 30 more are to follow. There were 36 in all. 36 television programs reliving all the horror and terror of 9/11. Planes flying into buildings, buildings crashing down, people jumping out of buildings, right? From like 80, 90 stories because, they'd rather die that way than burn to death, right? I mean, it's horrifying. 9/4, Rumsfeld calls for a preemptive attack on Iraq. So they're pushing the term preemptive. This becomes a new buzz term, preemptive. We got to hit him first before he hits us, right? Right? Assuming that he's going to hit us, assuming that he has something to hit us with, we better do it. 9/7, New York Times reports White House officials said today that the administration was following a meticulously planned strategy to persuade the public, the Congress, and the allies of the need to confront the threat of Saddam Hussein. In the end, it'll be difficult for someone to vote against it. He's talking about the Iraq War resolution. So they openly brag that they have a strategy to twist arms and manipulate the Congress into voting for this resolution, right? A meticulously planned strategy. So keep that in mind, and we'll see at the end. Was there a clear planned strategy? Was there a clear, sequence of planned actions? Will a pattern develop? Next day, 9/8. Bush administration announces Iraq has been stepping up its relentless quest for nuclear weapons. They had no nuclear weapons. They had no program. But they're saying there's a relentless quest for nuclear weapons, going all out to get them. Fear mongering. There was no truth to this. And the Bush administration were not victims of bad intelligence. They cooked up bad intelligence from Yellow Cake. All right. This is the false stuff that Joe Wilson was sent to Africa to go investigate. He reports there's no truth to this. It's a false rumor, right? Right after that, the Bush administration says, yeah, there's Yellow Cake. Iraq's trying to get, the raw material to get the uranium to build nuclear weapons. And here's quick. This is just off to the side. So Joe Wilson hears this. He just reported that there's no truth. And then the Bush administration saying, yeah, it's true, it's true. So Joe Wilson, with a little bout of conscience, contacts the New York Times and says, listen, I went down there, I investigated, there's no truth to it, right? I told them that. They're saying the exact opposite after I told them. So what does the Bush administration do? They retaliate against Joe Wilson, and they attack his wife, who was a CIA agent, who was directing the operations to get Iraqi scientists, right, to reveal information, right? And they out her. She's on a knock list, and they out her, say she's CIA, right? Which puts her life possibly at risk, puts the lives of all the scientists that she may have contacted at risk, right? Just for retaliation of airing out their lies, right? That's a Yellow Cake. And then aluminum tubes. Here's another thing, right? So Iraq purchased some aluminum tubes. Now, all the scientists who have knowledge of this were saying, those tubes are not of the quality, size and structure to be used for centrifugal, separation of uranium-235 from 238. All right. He said those are standard tubes that Iraq always uses for rocket bodies. All right. And then the mobile biological weapons labs, another right, false thing, reported by only one guy. I'll talk about that later. This was a joke. And then exact quantities. This happened later. This is I'll just mention it now, but this is Bush during his State of the Union speech in January of 2003. So this is a few months after this, all right? But during that speech, Bush went through a big litany of exact quantities of all sorts of, how much uranium they're buying. They bought so many tons of Yellow Cake. Oh, it's all lies, right? How much botulinum? We know that they have 9,372 barrels of botulinum. We know that they have, 15,762 barrels of, anthrax. We know that they have, 8,000 or whatever, 986 barrels of VX nerve gas. He's going through exact quantities, very specific, like they have absolute intelligence when it was all cooked up nonsense to keep it. Okay, so exact quantities of chemical biological weapons. Go ahead and YouTube that speech. January 2003. Bush in 1990s had he said that they had an advanced nuclear weapons development program. They didn't have a program since the Israelis took it out with F-16s. And during the 1990s, from 1991 to 1998, there was UN weapons inspectors swarming through there. We'll talk about that with Scott Ritter, the lead United Nations weapons inspectors. And I don't know how much I want to share about that because it could be a diversion. I want to stick to the point here. All right, so that's 9/8. Almost getting to the anniversary. 9/8 again. Bush administration, scare tactics. The first sign of a smoking gun may be a mushroom cloud, right? Now, is that a scary soundbite? Is that a type of soundbite that's going to stick in people's minds? It's fear-mongering. There was no nuclear weapons program. Now, the Bush administration used focus groups to determine the effectiveness of these terms. So this term itself was selected because a focus group said it would be effective at scaring the crap out of people. All right? I mean, that's like using an advertising agency to figure out how effective their lies will be. Bush administration says that Saddam Hussein's effort to build an arsenal of immensely destructive weapons leaves the U.S. little choice but to act against Iraq. Fear-mongering. There was no chemical, biological, or nuclear program. And Bush admits this. I'll show you the speech now in which Bush admits that there was no WMD, and he admits that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, right? So this speech was after we invaded Iraq, about 6 months after we invaded Iraq.
Suiciders to kill innocent life, who had relations with Zarqawi. Imagine what the world would be like with him in power.
Not true.
The idea is to try to help change the Middle East. Now look, part of the reason we went into Iraq was the main reason we went into Iraq at the time was we thought he had weapons of mass destruction. It turns out he didn't, but he had the capacity to make weapons of mass.
Okay, so he's trying to minimize the fact that they found no weapons of mass destruction. He said, "Oh, part of the reason." Okay, the main reason. No, that was like the sole reason why. That was a full argument why we should go invade Iraq. All right. And then he says, "Oh, but they kept the capacity." Well, I mean, it's so easy to say they kept the capacity. What is the capacity to rebuild their chemical weapons, system? Right? Well, you got the scientists. Did they kill off all the scientists? No, they're still there. They have the knowledge. And for example, a lot of the equipment, talking about the equipment to make chemical weapons, we sold them that stuff during the Reagan administration in the 80s. That was authorized sales by the Reagan administration. Both the equipment and the materials to make chemical weapons, plus biological. The Randall Report, congressional report investigating U.S. supply of, WMD materials to Iraq, stated that authorized by the Reagan administration was huge list. If you read that report, it's page after page after page of deadly biological toxins. You name it, right? We sold it to Iraq back then, right? Now, they had to clear house or they couldn't sell oil in the 1990s, right? But we sold them that stuff way back. All right, so this is where he admits that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11.
They're going to stir up the hornet's nest theory. It just doesn't hold water as far as I'm concerned. The terrorists attacked us and killed 3,000 of our citizens.
All right, so that is such a lie. He's using this. Okay, they killed 3,000. Wait a minute. Iraq didn't do it. Al Qaeda did it. So now a reporter's gonna question.
Before we started the freedom agenda in the Middle East, they were. What did Iraq have to do with what?
The attack on the World Trade Center.
Nothing, except for it's part of. And nobody's ever suggested in this administration that Saddam Hussein ordered the attack. Iraq was.
All right, that's not true. He hinted at it. Cheney was full on saying, "Hey, Iraq did it." Cheney was saying it, right? So now he admits, okay, Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. But did the American people know that? No. Over 70% of the American people believe that Iraq was behind 9/11, and that's why we're invading Iraq, right? All right, so Bush admits it. No WMD, no connection to 9/11. This was about September of 2003, after we invaded for 6 months. All right, so 9/9, Cheney warned grimly, time is not on our side. That's a ticking time bomb. Tick, 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 right? It's counting down. It's about to blow. Bush administration top national security officials said nearly in unison today, all together, Saddam Hussein's effort to build an arsenal of immensely destructive weapons left the United States little choice but to act against Iraq. Right? It's all about WMD. Don't tell me part of the reason, which didn't exist. So here's the first time release of an intelligence report. This is on 9/9, right? It said Iraq could be only months away, ticking time bomb, from producing nuclear weapons if they could lay hands on the necessary enriched uranium or plutonium. All right. Now, I remember reading this in the Sacramento Bee, the Sacramento newspaper, early in the morning. I remember where it was. I was at a McDonald's. And as soon as I read this, my radar went up. My alarm went off. I knew that it's classic method by the U.S. to release these intelligence reports to pass false information. All right? They're not trying to help the public. They're trying to manipulate the public. And so my radar went up. I knew something was in play from right on. And sure enough, I didn't know for sure. At the time, I just suspected it. But sure enough, it turned out exactly what I thought. And it turned out that, well, what gave me this knowledge was my knowledge of how the Johnson administration manipulated the American public into the Vietnam War, right? And part of the plan, they left the plan behind, was releasing intelligence reports, right? 9/11. So the 1 year anniversary of the attacks. Bush makes a commemoration speech, which he should have, and by this time, 36 TV documentaries on 9/11 had been aired at this point. 36, right? All this reactivating the terror of 9/11, including the date. When the date comes around and Bush makes his commemoration, well, this helps to reactivate that fear and terror. The number 9/11. Everyone still knows this today. All right. So on that day, one of the plotters of the 9/11 attacks, this guy, Ramzi bin al-Shibib, whatever, high-ranking Al-Qaeda leader, he is arrested, captured on this anniversary. All right. Okay, it could have been a coincidence that right on the anniversary he's captured. Of course, they'll arrest these guys on the same day, probably same day. It's announced they're arrested on 9/13. We'll get to that in a second. All right. So that's 9/11. They arrest this guy, right? Recall that they already arrested terror cells, 2 different terror cells on the same day, the 28th back here. Now they arrest this guy on the anniversary of 9/11. Very next day, Bush goes before the entire General Assembly of the United Nations. And I read that Bush's aides had to twist arms to get this time on this date, right after 9/11. Right? Bush speech, and he says the real terror threat is now Saddam Hussein. Tie Saddam to 9/11 with a bait and switch, right? So he's connecting Saddam with 9/11. That's fear mongering. And if an emboldened regime, Iraq regime, were to supply these weapons to terrorist allies, then the attacks of 9/11 would be a prelude to far greater horrors. He's saying 9/11 would be nothing compared to what Saddam Hussein will do, right? That's fear-mongering. New York Times reported, quote, President Bush has formally changed the face of America's primary enemy from Osama bin Laden, right, whereabouts unknown, to Saddam Hussein. So this is the bait and switch. All the fear generated by Osama bin Laden's attack, right, is dumped onto Iraq, who had nothing to do with 9/11. All the fear generated by bin Laden's 9/11 attack is flipped onto Saddam and Iraq, and it worked. Americans fell for this, right, across the board. All right, 9/12, Bush administration time release of intelligence report. Second one, on the magnitude of the threat of Saddam's WMD. Remember I told you in his speech, he went through exact quantities of fictitious, non-existent WMD. We know exactly he has this much. You know, and I remember watching that speech. And I remember thinking, he's just manufacturing numbers to make it seem real in people's heads. Right? And sure enough, that's the case. You give exact numbers, it's like you think, boy, they must have good intelligence. They know exactly how much they have. It's false. All right, 9/13. Bush said the United States would insist on short deadlines to take action against Iraq. We're talking days and weeks, not months and years, he said. Fear-mongering. This is also preconditioning the public to accept military action. So one of the methods used to manipulate the public into passively accepting a military action, usually short-term, like just intervention, is you precondition the public by having a preemptive release that this is what may happen, right? Now, it's a more complex process. It's fairly simple, but it's still a little bit more complex than that. It deals with catharsis, and I don't have time to teach you this method. But this is part of that method. Okay, so FBI announces the arrest of the Buffalo 6 terror cell on 9/13, 2 days after this, after 9/11, right? So my guess is they probably arrested these guys on 9/11 with this guy here, right? So again, this is, there's still terrorists living among us, right? This is scary. We had 9/11 and they're still out there, right? And there could be more. The investigation into the investigation into 5 Buffalo men, it turned out to be 6 overall, arrested on terrorism charges began before September 11th. Terrorist attacks, government sources told CNN. So they actually have been investigating these guys, known about them since June of 2001, right? That means they have been tracking these guys, observing these guys, watching these guys for 16 months before they arrested them here, right? So why were they sitting on them? Why do they wait for this day right here to arrest them? Oh, okay, who knows? Maybe they had a good reason, or maybe it's a coincidence, right? Just by accident, or maybe it's not. We'll take a look at the overall pattern. When you step back and see, in addition to the other ones coming up, it looks pretty clear. There's no accident. Now, the governor of New York at that time was a guy named, I think, Pataki or something like that. And I remember watching him on the news, and when they arrested these guys, he said, see, this now proves that the terrorist threat is real. And I'm thinking, what kind of, naive simpleton, right, would fall for this, right? And, well, that's what he said. And, in his mind, it worked. That's exactly the purpose of arresting these guys on that date. Or get in people's minds. It's real. It's still out there. All right. Saddam Hussein. Okay, so on the 16th, Saddam Hussein agrees to unconditional return of weapons inspectors to Iraq. Unconditional. I'm sorry. All right, let's think about this. If Saddam Hussein really has weapons of mass destruction, right? Why would he want to risk, being exposed with weapons inspectors there? Okay, all right. Maybe you can say, well, he's got them hidden really good. He knows he can. All right. But let me give you more. This is Scott Ritter. He was the chief United Nations weapons inspector on the ground in Iraq between 1991 and 1998. Now, you recall that in 1991 we had the Gulf War, and one of the conditions at the end of the Gulf War by the United Nations was that Iraq cannot sell any oil. That's 60% of their economy is oil exports, right? You take that, you're cutting out a huge other chunk of their economy, all right? They can't sell oil until they prove that they have no WMD. So they authorize UN weapons inspectors. Now, Scott Ritter, during the Gulf War, was a Marine Corps major within General Schwarzkopf's intelligence staff, specializing on weapons of mass destruction. As soon as the war is over, he's jumping on the gun. I'm going to be involved with these weapons inspections. He becomes the lead investigator in Iraq, right? And he wrote a book called Iraq Confidential, and in it he cites all the a whole litany of dirty games played by the CIA with weapons inspections, right? My third lecture, I'm gonna go over his book, right? Direct quotes from his book on all the dirty things that the CIA played to get bombing attacks with the weapons inspections, to get overthrow coup attempts with the weapons inspections, to get assassination attempts with the weapons inspections, right? All discrediting them, all risking getting them thrown out of the country. And he also discusses how the CIA obstructed and blocked his efforts. He was charging hard to try and find WMD, and CIA is blocking him. And he says their goal was not to find WMD. Their goal was to maintain the public perception that Iraq was hiding WMD because they could use that. Right? That's what he said. Now, so with all this, with the CIA playing dirty games with weapons inspections, why would Saddam want them back? Well, he feels the heat. You know, they're saying he's got WMD. He knows that they're trying to manipulate some casus belli to get an attack, to start a war with Iraq. So he said, listen, you guys come back in, right? He's trying to save his butt, right? All right. So then 2 days later, it's reported that U.S. rejects Iraq's arms inspection offers. We reject it, saying Bush administration rejects it, stating inspections threaten to split support for military action. They don't want weapons inspections. The Bush administration doesn't want them because that may block military attacks, right? Which is what Saddam Hussein obviously is trying to do, right? Bush doesn't want weapons inspections, prefers attacking Iraq. So the key thing that Ritter said is, right, with the weapons inspections, we weren't really looking. The CIA really didn't want to find WMD. They want to maintain, their goal was to maintain the public perception that Iraq was hiding them. Same thing being played out here. Iraq is hiding WMD. Same routine. 9/19. The Bush administration appeared well on its way to bulldozing Congress into the swift passage of a resolution endorsing a possible military campaign against Iraq. So now they're introducing the resolution, and the resolution is going to keep us safe, irrespective of whatever emerges from the United Nations Security Council. Okay? So now they're going to bulldoze Congress into swift passage of a resolution. Right? Now the resolution is going to authorize the president to use military force. It is euphemistic camouflage for a full-on declaration of war. Right? Only a simpleton would fall for that. But you know what? We apparently have plenty of simpletons in Congress, right? In the Senate that fell for this, right? Once you get a resolution, a congressional resolution, right, you have the full legal basis for a full-on war. Very few limitations, just a handful of trivial limitations, unlike manufacturing or, foreign aliens. 9/19. Rumsfeld said today that the dots are all connected. What dots? But with evidence. He said it's locked down, shut case, and that the U.S. must stop Iraq before that country had a chance to use weapons of mass destruction or put them in the hands of terrorists. Fear-mongering. 9/20. Bush today asked for a congressional resolution to authorize. So here's a big push for the resolution right about here. Remember I showed you up here? Right about here, they started pushing hard for the resolution. Here's the vote. It was a whirlwind day on multiple fronts as Mr. Bush made his hardest push yet for swift action on Iraq. Secretary Powell and Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld took the administration case to the Capitol. That's Congress and Senate, right? And keep in mind that the Bush administration pushed congressional leaders to get this vote before the October 15th recess, where everyone leaves Washington, goes back home to their home constituencies to pump up the voters to vote for them. All right, 920, there's another time release of a white paper. Bush administration publishes its rationale for preemptive attack, right? Plant this in the public mind. Prepare the public to accept preemptive attack. 920, 2002, Secretary of State Powell implored Congress today to pass swiftly the strongest Iraq resolution possible, pumping that resolution now, arguing that anything less would undermine efforts to build international support for ousting Saddam Hussein. That's regime change, right? Right. So now they're expanding it. Is it just WMD or is it regime change? Well, you know what? If it's going to involve invasion, right, that's going to be regime change. You don't invade a country and not overthrow that government. 921, leaked to press that the Pentagon has completed and delivered to President Bush a highly detailed set of military options for attacking Iraq, right? You can almost bet that this was the administration, not the military. Military didn't leak this. This is the Bush administration, right? And the purpose is, again, to prepare the public by planning it in mind preemptively, right? Thereby facilitating passive acceptance of the war. You precondition the public to accept it. If they know about it, there's no shock when it happens, right? And there's passive acceptance. All right. British Prime Minister Blair, here's another intelligence report. Quote, asserted today that the Iraq government of President Saddam Hussein could launch chemical or biological warheads in 45 minutes. That's a British intelligence report. Bogus, right? Is that scary? 45 minutes. That's like Cold War stuff. Oh, Soviet rockets can be, ICBMs can hit us within 45 minutes. What are you going to do in 45 minutes? You can barely pack a bag and jump in your car, right? Let alone try to fight traffic as everyone's trying to evacuate a city, right? I mean, this is scary. 45 minutes, you can't do anything. We're just going to get whacked and there's nothing you can do about it. The report said that Iraq stored and was continuing to produce chemical and biological agents capable of causing mass casualties, including mustard gas, sarin, anthrax, botulism. This was all lies. Didn't exist. Fear-mongering. Ticking time bomb. 45 minutes. Bush makes a fear-mongering speech. Quote, the danger to our country is grave. The danger to our country is growing. That's ticking time bomb. The Iraq regime possesses biological chemical weapons, which they did. The Iraq regime is building the facilities necessary to make more biological chemical weapons, which they weren't. And according to the British government, the Iraqi regime could launch a biological or chemical attack in as little as 45 minutes after the order was given. Again, false intelligence report citing the false British. There are Iraqi terrorists inside Iraq. The regime is seeking a nuclear bomb and with fissile material that could build one in a year. This was, Joe Wilson told them this is not true, and they lied about this. Senate 2000. So, now, the Senate 2006 intelligence report said the opposite about these guys. What Al-Qaeda terrorists? There was only a small group loosely related to Al-Qaeda hiding out from Saddam Hussein in U.S. protected, there's no-fly zone, right? Northern Iraq, I don't know if you remember that, but after the first Gulf War, they protected the Kurds by drawing a line in the sand, saying, listen, you cannot cross this line, we'll bomb the hell out of you do. No-fly zone protected by U.S., right? Well, where were these Al-Qaeda guys hiding out? In Kurdish, U.S. protected northern Iraq, right? Saddam Hussein was trying to get these guys, trying to infiltrate them, right, to get information on them. And the 2006 intelligence report said that Saddam Hussein was hunting down the radicals, the religious radicals, because they posed a threat to himself, right? Richard Clark. Let's see if I got a picture. Remember Richard Clark? He said that from all the writings that they acquired and speeches acquired on Al Qaeda, their number one goal was not to attack the U.S. Their number one goal was to overthrow a Middle East country and set up a caliphate, the religious state. To do that required overthrowing, like what ISIS tried to do, Syria or Iraq. So that was a threat to Saddam that these guys posed, right? He was hunting them down and executing them because he's trying to save his own butt. Why would he give them a WMD? No one's thinking. You think the press asked these questions? The press just pumped up the fear. I remember being sickened by the press back then. Just watching they just went along with the Bush administration's narrative, right? And when they reported it, they pumped up the fear. It made me sick. No one asked, well, is it really WMD? They weren't asking. They assumed it was WMD. And then no one asked, even if he had WMD, which he did, would he use it against Iraq? Was Saddam suicidal? Was he suicidal when he was hiding like a coward in a hole, right, when he was captured? And no one asked, well, why would he give these terrorists WMD, these religious fanaticals, right, when the first people they would use on is not the U.S., but Iraq itself? Their number one goal is to take down a Middle East country and set up their own caliphate. Why would he give them WMD? That's, no one's thinking. All right. So he's hunting them down. He's trying to infiltrate these guys up here. All right. 9/27. Bush press release. Another speech. Quote, our determination to confront an urgent threat to America. Urgent. The dangers we face will only worsen from month to month and year. Ticking time bomb. It's only going to get worse. We got to do something now. Hurry up. To ignore these threats is to encourage them. And when they have fully materialized, it may be too late. Ticking time bomb. To protect ourselves and our friends and our allies. By then, the Iraq dictator would have the means to terrorize and dominate the region. Each passing day, ticking time bomb, could be the one on which the Iraq regime gives anthrax or VX gas or someday a nuclear weapon to a terrorist ally. Again, no one's thinking, right? Why would he give these guys who pose a threat to him WMD? All right. 9/27. Plan to use fear to control the election. Congressional Majority Leader Gephardt, he was a congressman back then, Democratic congressman. He's quoted in the paper saying, look, the president assured Americans that politics would not play a part in deciding issues of life and death. What does that mean? That means war, right? We're not going to use politics to play this, to play politics. Which is why when Karl Rove, this guy here, who is the Republican Party strategist, right? He's the key Republican Party strategist, told the Republican Party meeting last January that talk of war and terror themes could play to the GOP's advantage in the 2002 election, or last June when a computer disk containing a presentation by Mr. Rove revealed a White House political strategy to focus on the war as a way to maintain a, quote, positive issue environment. Basically it's saying by pushing the war, terror, and fear, that would give the Republican Party advantage in the November election. Right? That was a Republican Party strategy. Right? All right, so 9/27, politicizing the resolution vote. Republicans made voting for the resolution an issue of patriotism. All right, that's a quote from one of the papers. And by the way, my sources I got from LexisNexis, right? It's easy to find all these, things that were that happened with LexisNexis. I mean, at your fingertips, you just find all this stuff, tons of information. 928, the Bush administration demands weapons inspections of all of Saddam's presidential palaces. I want to talk about this in a second. So I'll talk about it now. Remember Scott Ritter? This guy up here, in his book, Iraq Confidential, he mentioned these he said during 1991 and 1998, the CIA demanded that there would be inspections of palaces, right? And he said they demanded that the UN's weapons inspections teams take on U.S. structural engineers, right, in order to plan for assassination attempts on Saddam. So the structural engineers would go through his palaces. They would find out the likely places where Saddam would be. I don't know where his bedroom is, whatever. Right? They would do an analysis of the, a structural protection that's there and what will be required to bomb his palace to kill Saddam in an assassination attempt. So they were planning in the past to use presidential palace weapons inspections to assassinate Saddam, right? Now, this stuff here is, I read from you could take this with a grain of salt, because I read this in a German newspaper about 2004 or 5, way back. I can't remember where, the German newspaper. It was one of the major ones, like Der Spiegel or something like that, right? Right, but I can't remember exactly, and I can't find it again. It's been buried, under the weight of all this such extra, I don't know, stuff. I can't find it again. But the report was during the build-up to attack Iraq, right, between September 11, 2002, the anniversary, and the actual invasion, it was leaked that there were CIA plans to use the palace inspections for attempts to assassinate Saddam. Well, is that possibly credible? Well, Scott Ritter says that this was actually done in the 1990s, right? Now, again, I don't have this source anymore, so you could take this with a grain of salt. But, if it were leaked, which, I can't say if it was for sure, but if it were leaked, who would leak it? The CIA. Now, I can't prove this, so take it with a grain of salt, but, I know that this is classic CIA methods. CIA, here's just a hypothetical. CIA intentionally, they demand that the presidential palaces are inspected. Then they leak, right, that the weapons inspections are going to be used to, when they inspect the palaces, to get assassination attempts on Saddam. Now they leak that, so it gets to the Iraqi, security forces. And what's the likely result? Well, they have fear, right? And they react by ejecting throwing out the weapons inspectors. And as soon as that happens, right, the American public and the American Congress is going to say, see, that's proof positive that they're concealing. They have weapons of mass destruction and they're hiding. Now, I don't know for sure if that happened, right? So just take it with a grain of salt, right? It's a possibility. But they're demanding the palaces, to be inspected. Like they're hiding WMD in these palaces, right? All right, okay, whatever. So that's when they did that. On 9/28, Bush administration demanded that inspections of the palaces occur. Right? And there's a little history behind that. How much, actually occurred, I can't say. Right? So just take that with a grain of salt. But that's the day they demanded the palace inspections. All right, 9/28, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld said today that American intelligence has bulletproof, dots connected, evidence of links between Al-Qaeda and the government of Saddam Hussein. Now, in September of 2003, 6 months after we invaded, Bush admitted there were no links. All right. And in 2006, the Senate intelligence report said Saddam was hunting down and executing Al-Qaeda religious extremists in his country because they posed a threat to him. 10-1, Bush timed release of a white paper stating there are reasons why a congressional resolution was absolutely necessary. New York Times said Bush administration provides a buffet of reasons for a resolution. You know, WMD is primary, Al Qaeda links, Iraq providing training to Al Qaeda and use of chemical weapons, which were all false. That was a report, a statement given by one guy and one guy alone, who was being tortured by Egyptian security forces. He was captured, rendition to Egypt, and the Egyptians were torturing him. And under torture, he said, Iraq is training Al Qaeda in WMD. Right? So, National Security Advisor Rice and Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld both stated there was evidence that Iraq trained Al Qaeda in the use of chemical weapons. Now, this came from one guy, al-Libi. Right? The CIA itself rejected this as being non-credible. Right? Iraq had, first of all, why would Iraq be training, Al Qaeda on WMD when they had no WMD, right? I mean, there's no point in training them if they have no WMD. Why would you train in WMD if you have no WMD? Why would you train them in WMD when the first people they will attack with the WMD is you? Their number one goal was to overthrow a Middle East nation like Iraq. All right, so here comes the next wave of legal actions. All right, 10-4. John Lynn Walker, or Walker Lynn, he's an American who joined the Taliban. He's convicted and sentenced to 20 years. Terrorists, get Americans doing this stuff. And actually, after we invaded, that's when you had the rise of homegrown terrorist cells. 10-4, Richard Reed, the infamous shoe bomber. He pleads guilty. Terrorists of all among us. Legal action, timed. 10-5, CIA time release a false intelligence report. Iraq is making WMD. 10-5, Bush called Saddam Hussein cold-blooded killer who lies and deceives. Who lies and deceives? They lied and deceived about all this stuff to get the war. And who did far more killing? The war did far more killing. Who is the real cold-blooded killer? Who lies and deceives and creates a bloody war that increased terrorism, that increased the terrorist threat, destabilized the Middle East, exacerbated the Sunni-Shia conflict? 10-5, terrorist cell in Portland arrested. Terrorists living all among us. They're still out there, living among us. We can be hit again. Same day, terrorist cell in Detroit arrested. Terrorists living all among us. 10-6, next day, Bush fear-mongering. Saddam has a horrible history of striking without warning. 10-6, FBI time release of intelligence report. Another intelligence report. They're compiling an open book of the lives of hundreds of mostly young, mostly Muslim men in the United States in the belief that Al-Qaeda trained terrorists remain in this country awaiting instructions of attack. Right? So hundreds of these guys, not just, there's hundreds of these guys. Scary. Right, all this time, right before the vote, which is on 10-10. 10-7, New York Times reports that 9/11 fear scare tactics is working and undermining Democrats' chances of elections. That's Karl Rove's political strategy working. Use the fear and war talk to shift support away from the Democrats, who are seen as soft, and to the Republicans, who are better going to keep you safe. All right, so now this is 10-7. This is the big speech, nationally televised by Bush, which is the big pump up for the congressional resolution to authorize use of military force, which means war. This is the war ticket. Keep in mind, it's euphemistic, it's sneaky, but it means war. All right, the time for denying, deceiving, delaying has come to an end. All right. So who's being deceptive and who's lying? Well, okay. Saddam Hussein must disarm himself or for the sake of peace. This is classic. He always do this for peace. Remember Johnson administration, Gulf of Tonkin, right? We're going to start an offensive to keep the peace. We're gonna invade North Vietnam to keep the peace. All those speeches were a big buildup to the Gulf of Tonkin incidents. Bush said Saddam Hussein could attack the United States or its allies, and on any given day with chemical and biological weapons. Right? Remember the CIA goal? All right. 10-8, New York headlines. Election fever turns dovish Democrats into hawks. So that's, again, the plan is working. Right? The Democrats are going to vote for this resolution. Right? They're caving in, right, to the political pressure here. Bush plan is working. Karl Rove. 10-9, the Daily Telegraph. It's a wire service out of London. Poll results. Bush speech effective. Quote, President George W. Bush has swung American popular opinion firmly behind him by linking the threat from Iraq to September 11. Bait and switch. Right? Don't tell me they didn't leak the 9/11 attacks to Iraq. So here is the resolution vote on 10-10, just before the recess here, authorizing President Bush to use military force. It passes by 77% in the Senate and 69% in the House. Resolution is used as a legal base for the Iraq War. All that war is based upon this piece of paper right here. Now, given the toxic fear environment created by the Bush administration, to vote against this resolution was political suicide. Right? We'll talk about that in the review here. All right, so then you have the congressional recess. All the congressmen pack their bags and go home. Last full 19 days before the election. Last chance to do your last-minute campaigning. You vote against this, your political opponent can eat you alive, right? Not only are you non-patriotic, you're unpatriotic. You don't care. Man, you might as well, you might as well be a terrorist lover. You're coddling these terrorists. You're some radical, left-wing, liberal, soft on terror. You don't care about the safety of the American people. They can eat you up, right? This is the thing that's going to keep us safe, right? You voted against it. You voted against our safety. You don't care about the American public. All right, so then they get the election and the Democrats get hammered. Democrats control both the House and the Senate going against the election. They lost both. Big swing the other way. The Republicans won majorities in the House and the Senate, right? So Rove's plan, the Bush-Rove plan worked, right? This is just an aside. I didn't learn about this until I just saw a movie, and then I researched a little bit about it. I'm not an expert on this, right? But there was a attempt by the Bush administration to find dirt on United Nations Security Council members to blackmail them into voting for action against Iraq. Right? That's just another one of the things the Bush administration did. Right? They're trying to coerce and blackmail United Nations Security Council members to attack Iraq. All right, that's just something aside. So let's do a quick review. Now, putting it all together, does it seem like it's random? Or was there a definite pattern? Was there a definite plan? Did the Bush administration say they had a plan? Did they brag they have a plan? Well, on September 7th, just before the one-year anniversary, a Bush administration official openly stated they had a plan. We are following a meticulously planned strategy to persuade the public, the Congress, and the allies of the need to confront the threat of Saddam Hussein. In the end, it'll be difficult for someone to vote against it, the Iraq War resolution. Now, did they make it difficult to vote against it? Yeah. Did newspapers at the time recognize this? Yeah. Turning dovish Democrats into hawks. Right? Winning the popular opinion. Poll results showing. All right, so let's take a look at the overall plan here, the overall big picture, and we'll talk about where these fit in. All right. So remember, P is planning to use the Al-Qaeda attack to attack Iraq. F is jacking up fear, hyping up fear, creating this toxic environment, atmosphere of fear. R, try to push the resolution to get a vote on it, right? And that's going to be the legal basis for the war. Right? This is the hot little ticket to war. All right. So the plan to use attack by Al-Qaeda, not Iraq. Al-Qaeda did this. To use this attack to attack Iraq started on that day, 9/11. Right away, they're thinking, we can use this to attack Iraq. Bush is pushing it the next day. Right? Now, let's take a look at the plan here. There's 3 key dates. One key date is 9/11 anniversary. Why is that key? Because on that date, all this fear is hyped up again, is reactivated, right? It is perfect to associate that and flip that onto Iraq then, on this date, right? Which Bush did on 9/12, right after that. And then you have the congressional recess. You have the vote for the resolution, which has to be before the recess. And then you have the strong arm, the leverage. This is the congressional election, right? You know, all Congress and 1/3 of the Senate. All right. Okay. So now, within this fear-mongering, let's take a look at the elements. Let's see if these were accidental. Fear-mongering, terrorists living among us, right? The first wave arrests were timed somewhat with 9/11, right? These came early, same day. 5 Al-Qaeda arrested in Detroit. Same day, August 28th. Terrorist cell in Seattle arrested, right? 9/11 attack planner, Shibin, whatever, arrested, right? Probably 9/11, I don't know the exact date, but I know it was reported only 2 days later, so I'm guessing 9/11. The Buffalo 6 are arrested. Now, keep in mind, the feds knew about these guys for 16 months at the time they arrested. They're sitting on these guys for 16 months. Why would they arrest them on 9/11? Right? Seems a little like, okay, a little suspicious. Right? Second wave, 10/4, John Lynn Walker action. 10/4, shoe bomber Richard Reed action. 10/5, arrest terrorist cell in Portland. Right? Been watching these guys. They were watching these guys for 6 months before 9/11. Was it 6 months? That's the information I have here. I knew the information here about 4 months was good, June. Right? I gotta go back and. All right, well, whatever. You can take this with a grain of salt. I don't remember that, but okay. 10/5, Detroit Al-Qaeda cell arrested. Right? 10/6, FBI leaks report that there are hundreds of Al-Qaeda trained Muslim men living in the United States awaiting orders at any time. They're compiling a book of hundreds, right? All right. Now, this is before 9/11, associated with 9/11, right? And this is right before the vote, right? Now, does this look like it's random? Like they're scattered these throughout the year? Or do these look like they're carefully timed and planned together? For maximum impact, you pack them together, two of them, right? A whole 5 of them here. All right, now, the average person, you know, who wants to deny this is going to say, "Oh, conspiracy theory." You know what's funny? Whenever I ask a person who says that to define conspiracy theory, you know what the response is? It's like, yeah, conspiracy is theory is a well, you know, when they can barely scratch out a sentence explaining it, and that defines a whole understanding, their whole interpretation, perception. That's typical of people. It's not based on anything, right? They don't know any of the facts, right? They're going to say, you can't do that. Government, how hard is it? Every one of these things is one organization, FBI. You know what that means? It means you make one phone call. Say, hey, listen, right? Why don't you, time these things, right? Time a few around 9/11, time right before. I don't have proof of this. There's no documentation. But if you look at this, right, this is not natural. This is not unnatural. This is not just random. This is man-made. All right. All right. Now, that's just part of it. Then you have the resolution vote on 1010. Then you have congressional recess. Then you have, the election, right? Look at Bush's speech. Look at this pattern. Look at how talk about blitz. Not only is a blitz of fear mongering by administration officials, there was a blitz of fear mongering by Bush himself. Here's all the speeches, right? 9/11, 9/12, 9/14, 9/21, 9/26, 9/27. That's his big one. Nationally televised one, right? 9/28, 10/5. Oh, no. 10/7 is a nationally televised. This is a big one. 10/7, right? That's his big nationally televised one there. And then you got the vote. So I think this is like 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right? 9 of them Bush speeches. All right. So let's look at the time release of intelligence reports. Right? You think this is an accident that they're all released within less than a month. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 intelligence reports released within less than a month. Packed all together. Don't tell me that's not a pattern. Don't tell me that's not timed. Don't tell me that's not meant to pump up fear. Now, that doesn't include British intelligence. Remember the 45-minute thing? When was that? There it is. 9:25. I could add that in there. Wait, where am I at here? All right. I'll just put 45-minute. Fear report. They can hit you in 45 minutes. All right, so let's take some more quotes from Richard Clarke, right? He resigned because they invaded Iraq. He was the anti-terrorist czar from the Clinton administration to the Bush administration, right? He says this, right, from his book, when asked about Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Quote, I am unaware of any Iraq-sponsored terrorism directed at the United States. Paul, since, I think he's talking to Wolfowitz, since 1993. And I think FBI and CIA concur in their judgment. Right, John? I pointed at CIA Deputy Director John McLaughlin, who was obviously not eager to get in the middle of a debate between the White House and the Pentagon, but nonetheless replied, Pentagon, that's Wolfowitz. But nonetheless replied, yes, that's right, to get in, that's right, Dick. We have no evidence of any active Iraq terrorist threat against the U.S. That's from CIA. That's from the anti-terrorist czar, top anti-terrorist expert in the U.S. Clarke, quote, it is not hard to understand why, after repeatedly hearing remarks, President Bush remarks like that, 70% of the American population believes Saddam Hussein had attacked the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. I suspect that many of the heroic U.S. troops who risked their lives fighting in Iraq thought, because of misleading statements from the White House, that they were avenging the 3,000 dead from September 11th. What a horrible thing it was to give such a false impression to our people and our troops. He's saying this was no accident, like Bush is saying. Hey, we didn't try to do it. Only on September 2003, only after occupying Iraq, only after Vice President Cheney stretched credulity on Meet the Press, did the president clearly state that there was no evidence that Iraq was involved in the September 11th attacks. Remember the YouTube, Bush Minute? Quote, I doubt that anyone ever had a chance to make the case to him that attacking Iraq would actually make America less secure and strengthen the broader radical Islamic terrorist movement. Did it do that? Hell yes, it did. It blew up the anti-American terrorist. It made ISIS. Clark, nothing America could have done would have provided Al-Qaeda and its new generation of clone groups a better recruitment device than our unprovoked invasion of an oil-rich Arab country, right? Of course they're thinking, nothing else could have so well negated all the other positive acts and so closed Muslim eyes and ears to our subsequent calls for reform in their region. It was as if Osama bin Laden, hidden in some high mountain redoubt, were engaging in long-range mind control of George Bush, chanting, invade Iraq, you must invade Iraq. He's saying there's nothing better that would help Al-Qaeda's cause than our invasion of Iraq. That's simple strategic thinking, right? You don't have to be a genius to figure that out. It's common sense. As an analyst by the Army War College Strategic Studies Institute, written by Jeffrey Record, argues the Iraq War was a strategic error of the first magnitude. Instead of energetically pursuing the priority of creating an ideological counterweight for Al-Qaeda, we invaded Iraq and gave Al-Qaeda exactly the propaganda fuel it needed. All right. Now, one of the fundamental strategies is you gotta boost the morale of your people, and you gotta undermine the morale of your enemy. In whatever way you undermine the morale, you cut their will to fight. Right? You cut the legs from under them if you do that. Right? This does the opposite. It boosts it. The invasion, when it came in 2003, lost us many friends. Polling data had already suggested that the U.S. was not trusted and liked by majorities in Islamic countries. Right? After all we've done in the Middle East, there is no doubt. After the invasion, those numbers hit all-time highs, not only in Muslim countries, but around the world. In Muslim countries, the U.S. invasion of Iraq increased support for Al-Qaeda and radical anti-Americanism. It created ISIS. ISIS formed as a result of our invasion of Iraq. Elsewhere, we were not seen as we are now seen as a super bully more than a superpower, not just for what we did, but for the way we did it, sustaining international mechanisms that we would later need. So when we invaded Iraq, Gallup polls showed that 72% of Americans were in favor of invasion and the war. Right? Now, I'm willing to bet very few Americans will say that today. Back then, when it was actually real, that's what Americans did. Right? 72% were suckered by the Bush administration. All right, summary. The Bush administration openly said that they had meticulously planned strategy. They said they had a planned strategy. Was it clear? Does it seem like there's a clear pattern here? Absolutely. All right. To manipulate the U.S. public, the Congress, and our allies to take action against Saddam and make it difficult for someone to vote against it. All right. This is arm twisting. Republican Party strategist Karl Rove is on record saying that focus must be maintained on talk of war and terror to win the November election. They manipulated the U.S. public and Congress with a bait and switch, timed with the one-year anniversary of 9/11, in which they exploited all the fear and horror that was created by the original 9/11 attacks, and that deceptively dumped that onto Iraq, flipped that onto Iraq. And fear-mongering always works because it's irrational and it's powerful. It's potent. It's about how we survived as a species all these years. They then conducted an elaborate fear campaign, a blitz of fear signals timed before the war resolution, which was timed right before the congressional recess, which is the last 3 weeks for congressmen and senators to go back home and do the last-minute campaigning. And if you vote against it, like I said, right, your opponent can eat you alive. It's political suicide, right? This made voting against the Iraq War resolution difficult because that would be political suicide, an extreme atmosphere of toxic fear that was created by the campaign, the fear campaign, timed with 9/11. So all these were timed with the 1-year anniversary of 9/11, the Congressional War Resolution, and the November election. A non-stop daily barrage of fear-mongering. You know, WMD, WMD, WMD. Every damn day. 8 FBI arrests or legal actions, all time packed together, right? 9 speeches by Bush, right? Many more press releases by Bush administration officials. 6 intelligence, I want to say 7 intelligence reports, including that British one. Now, these were all timed, and it worked perfectly. Congress voted resoundingly for the Iraq War Resolution. With the war resolution, the Bush administration had its hot little ticket to war, right? Which it planned to go to war in the spring, which it did. And 72% of the American population were suckered by this, and they supported U.S. military invasion of Iraq. Republicans stole the 2002 election, taking control of both the House and the Senate away from the Democrats. Other nations joined in with the Iraq invasion, and they became targets as well. Right? Remember there was a terrorist attack on a British bus and a Spanish subway? Right? All because they invaded Iraq as well. So the invasion of Iraq was a huge boost for Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. It formed ISIS. It destabilized the Middle East. It blew up, greatly exacerbated the Sunni-Shia conflict. All right. For a list of specific methods used by the Bush. All right, so I have specific methods down here, right here. I'm not going to get it. It's analysis of the detailed analysis of the methods. It's going to take too much time to do that. I'll skip that. Now we have an exponentially bigger threat in terms of size, viciousness, worldwide, homegrown, right? These didn't exist until we invaded Iraq. And ISIS, which is a national threat. They have national resources, or they did when I wrote this way back then. I wrote a strategy to defeat ISIS, which looks like it was used. Right? Used effectively. Neocon plan to overthrow 7 governments in 5 years, right? More destabilization, right? More conflict, right? Neocons foreign policy. Oh, I don't know why I said this here. All right, I'm going to stop there. I'll show you just briefly this chart again. So, you know, there far more than just oil. There's many ways of making money off of conflict in the Middle East. It's huge, right? I'm not going to get into this until I explain exchange theory, explain the history of the oil industry, and explain the history of U.S. Foreign policy in the Middle East. And, you know, then I think people will be ready to understand this. So this would be premature to explain this, but I'm just showing you that there's far more ways of making money, even personally for Bush himself with his corporations. Family corporations, Halliburton, Dresser Industries, KBR, you know, but it's more than that too. Far more than that. All right, so that's it for that lesson. I hope I was able to show you, you know, it's a lot of information, and if there's a lot of information, people don't retain it, and it's like, what? That doesn't mean anything. It's a blur. It's a blur, right? But hopefully, you know, at least some people retained it and saw that there's clear planning here, that they said there's plans, and all right, that's enough.